So then let's move forward to talking about the next Zelda, which Nintendo has been clear will not be at E3, which is very sad, very, very sad. If you heard the episode where we talked about it, I was devastated because it's something that last E3, I mean, 30 seconds of footage made everyone just light up.
Yeah. Just him standing there.
Yeah, and then he moved.
And then he moved for a brief second.
And everyone sort of said, wow. And then the promise of sort of an open world and what that can possibly mean for Zelda. Because it never really, I don't think it dawned on me, at least until that moment, that those worlds were never really open, that they were sort of contained spaces to a degree. Wind Waker, actually, as you brought up earlier, had the promise of it, but didn't really deliver that. So then what are our hopes for this open world Zelda, right? What I feel like maybe we've been hinting at it a little bit as we've been talking this entire time, but what do you ultimately want to see them do?
Well, for starters, I think they're on a good path with Link Between Worlds, in my opinion. My girlfriend Sean and I started playing it at the same time. We got our copies. We were very excited. We went to a restaurant and had a cheap dinner and sat there in the booth and both started playing. And within a few minutes, we were in different parts of the world doing different things. Yep. And I said, how do you get the running boots already? She said, I'm not telling you. You have to figure it out. So we were just doing it our own way, and it was so exciting. If you can do that, if you can go off in your own direction, get lost, have a different experience from someone else, maybe replay the game and do it a totally different way. That's fun.
Yeah, David and I disagreed on A Link Between Worlds because he liked it much more than I did. But I think...
Why is that? Just in one sentence.
Well, just because to me it was like baby steps. It was like, great, we can rent the items. Great, it's a little out of order. It's still so much linked to the past for me, and it's very smooth and feels good and stuff like that. But I just...
Too seductive for you. Too reassuring.
I like Link to the Past.
No, I mean, So anyway, I think along those lines that for me, I really need to relearn the world. So even though yes, you could say that A Link Between Worlds kind of mixes things up and put things out of order and stuff, it was still, I kind of knew how everything worked, and so I don't like to know. It's one thing to have an open world where you can go anywhere. I mean, that's possible. There's many games that do that.
That's right.
It's that I want to go to somewhere and say, oh, that's a dungeon I'm gonna do later. Oh, I don't want to be able to read the world. I've often written about mystery and wanting something that really, when you look at a world, you have all these feelings about going into it and, ooh, what's over there. And I guess I just kind of want to learn the language of Zelda again. And that's a more radical, that's obviously asking a lot, because of the iterative process of games, But there's something about that language and the way that I read it that I want to be able to, get lost. And not just get lost because there's not a helper or a little signpost, but also get lost I don't know, I don't know what I'm doing. That's not usually something that people look for in games. I want to not know what I'm doing. Usually you want to feel good about what you're doing. But, some of my most powerful game memories, I remember when I was younger, I played Ultima 5, and I never really got very far in the game, but I accidentally went into the underworld and started following a river, and I just got totally lost. And it was an overwhelming feeling of experiencing a world, and it was terrifying. I mean, it's a game, but it stays with me till this day. And so if I could have anything, get in over my head and have to get my way back out, and I don't know, I want secrets to be secret. I mean, that doesn't sound like to me much to ask, but that a secret actually be secret. But Zelda games don't have many real secrets. That's why you remember the wall that didn't have a marker, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So those are the kind of rules I would love to relearn in a game and really kind of feel like it was an adventure. I mean, I come back to that word because I don't get that in games very much. I kind of know how everything works.
If they can introduce new systems that they don't understand initially, and you have to really learn the rules of the world again, then it would feel.
I don't want a skill tree. I don't want a collecting mechanic here. I don't want an upgrade system. I know what those things are.
It's interesting. Go
No,
ahead.
no. Oh, were you gonna respond? Or I
No,
was
no,
gonna drop mine.
it's funny because like we sometimes talk about Destiny because Jose always wants me to play it.
I
And
do,
always say,
even
"No."
though it's a difficult
No,
game
I've-
to get people to play
I've
sometimes.
played too much. But, you know, Destiny to me had a couple of elements where I didn't understand what was going on. I'm like, why are there lights in the sky and I got to cleanse myself so I can see and like
I remember this conversation very well.
But it was like I love it when I can figure something out and I understand it and I'm not standing there going like, okay, this is alien technology. I just got to suspend disbelief and just that's just how it works. Like it bothers me. I need to explain the world, but I do like it in games when you open a door and it's the inside of a volcano and you go in and you're losing hearts. And I like it when that is not just a locked gate where you can't do anything, where you can actually inch forward and you can get to the treasure chest and you're like, yes, I got something. And you kind of feel like you tricked the world. The world doesn't want you to be there, but you can get in. Or you dive and I can't dive far enough and I'm losing hearts, but I still make it. That's the stuff I love. And like if they open up the world to let you use your limited abilities to get something
It feels
and
like
then
you're subverting
more
it
later.
a little bit,
yeah.
right? Because I feel like the problem is when you play in a Zelda world, the Zelda world has a god.
Yeah.
Right? Maybe we can call him
Right.
like whatever. It has a god
It has
that
three
made
gods.
Miyamoto.
And you can feel the presence
Goddesses.
of the creator at every turn, right? You can feel that. Whereas like I want a world that feels like it has no god in games. You know, one where there's nobody in charge and, you know, that makes a world well, it just makes the world feel real in a way that it doesn't just feel like a designed clockwork thing I'm going to just go through. Instead it's like what the hell?
So wait, does Demon Souls have a god?
Well, the truth is, Demon Souls delivers in many ways. It doesn't have an open world, and it feels designed, very designed. So I don't think it really does that. I think that its design, you know, gets in you like your nervous system in a way. And I you know, I really like when a game makes me sweat, when it makes me feel dangerous feelings, you know, like when I'm feeling like rattled or something. And I guess Zelda has not done that for me in a while. I feel like very like, nice, you know.
Yeah.
But do you like those moments like in the Souls games, and it happens in Destiny too, where you figure out a way to beat an enemy, but you're kind of beating their AI, or you're standing on top of something and they can't quite get to you and they walk around and bump into walls? Like, do you get satisfaction out of that? Because like I can see that element too there. There are a lot of players who are like, no, that's part of the game. You know, that's not a bug that I can safely kill this enemy. I figured out this game world and I'm winning.
I think anything in the game is fair. Like they made the game the way it is. So like if that's possible, you know, if you're playing with someone else, I think then you bring in like, you know, in a fighting game, like what's fair and stuff, and that's between you and the other person you're fighting. But when it's just you in a game, if it's permissible, like I don't, you know, that's I don't know. I think like in like Demon Souls, you use the environment to your advantage. You go for any advantage you can get. Yeah. You know, you were just like tooth and nail. You were trying to like get somewhere in there. So like you do what you got to do, and I like that desperation. Most games, you know, if I figure out the best technique or something, then. Yeah. It's like somebody else already did that, and I'm just following in their footsteps. And I want to go my own path.
Yeah, and it becomes the only technique, which ultimately then takes away from it.
Right, then you just start repeating what works.
Yeah.
And
I do have hopes that with the next Zelda being open world, that open world impacts that Zelda in a way that maybe nothing has before. It's funny because just more recently I've been a bit more acquainted with open world games. I started playing Xenoblade X, which is out in Japan, and that, you know, there is sort of a thrill to ending up in areas you're not supposed to be, because you'll look around and be like, man, that monster is a level 80 something, and if it turns around right now, I'm done. Like there's nothing that can save me. So there is a thrill to that. But something it has that this open world with Zelda has me thinking a lot about is just the notion of side quests and the notion of a second quest, something that's not just that main story path, and how will Zelda adapt to that? Because I feel like when I look back at the other Zeldas, the side quests were sort of mini game-ish. They were, you know, if you take Majora's Mask, there's like, you know, the carnival games you play, or there's the occasional win a horse race against someone. And they still feel very gamey. Yeah. Like it doesn't feel like it's an adventure or that you're a hero. It just feels like, well, I have to do this thing to ultimately get a prize that I'm going to need somewhere else. And that's not to say they're not entertaining. I feel like they can be, but I just wonder if Zelda Week U, NX, whatever you want to call it, will inevitably explore the notion of what it means to be like a hero in this big world, you know, because I feel like every game is framing that to a degree, that you are the hero and that you are going to save everyone, or you're the hero no one ever heard of.
Yeah.
In most Zeldas, you are. Like, no one really recognizes.
You're not the hero of Kvatch.
Yeah, the Kvatch. You know about the hero of Kvatch?
Yeah.
But I mean that I just hope that somehow that sort of builds into it. And I don't. Some people would say, well, I want Skyrim. I want Zelda to be more like Skyrim. I kind of don't want that to a degree. Like, I'm one of the few Skyrim haters on this planet.
Really?
Actually, yeah.
I'm not fond of Skyrim either.
I love Skyrim, but I also like a Zelda world that has a bit more scripting. Like, I am fine with like the Majora's Mask's the story quests where you follow someone and they do the same thing every day. Obviously, in the narrative, that's how it works with a 3-day setup. But I do like that there's a little bit more structure to a character doing something. You can figure out what they do versus Skyrim, where quite frankly, I can accidentally kill someone in town. I'm like, oh no, you know, like,
and that has consequences.
I know, but that bothers me.
That has straight up consequences. And I think there is one quest. In Majora's Mask that does reflect that a little bit. It's the Lover's Quest.
Yes,
that you have to sort of piece together what happened and then come to his rescue. That's probably one of the few side quests I can think of off the top of my head, and maybe it's just because it's one of the most recent Zelda I've played, but where I felt like, wow, this was dark and this was different and this was, you know, there was true love at the end and all this stuff.
But even in that game, even like when the letter gets delivered to the girl in the inn, right? Like just witnessing the exchanges between the characters, like seeing the postman arrive or seeing the Goron arrive and ultimately you stealing his room, like all those interactions were really clever. Yeah. Those would be really difficult to do without scripting. I mean, either they're a cutscene like in a game like Skyrim, like some guy walks in and does it, or, you know, you wouldn't even notice that was going on.
Yeah,
you know, whereas like Majora's Mask pulled that off really well, and I want more of that kind of stuff too.
Yeah, and I do like your point, because scripting ultimately helps a lot of that work to a degree, and it is hilarious that then you can take that letter and turn it into toilet paper for the hand in the bathroom. Like, just go, here you go, goodbye.
But doesn't the scripting work in Majora's Mask because of the repetition of days?
For sure.
So you understand it in the context of time travel and all that kind of stuff. When it's in a game and there you can feel the scripting, but it's just like happening right now, and then the fakeness comes out, then the kind of like unbelievableness of it.
For sure, yeah.
So something about Majora's Mask structure that really allows that to have meaning in a way that you would get annoyed.
Actually, that's a great point, because of that structure of 3 days, you ultimately discover that some characters who are in a certain place on day 1 aren't necessarily on day 2 or day 3. Like, it does radically change the way that works, but then you can just go back to the start. I bring this up too because when we last saw Zelda, they showed, you know, sort of that map on the gamepad, and it was a clock there, and I'm just like, well, why is that there? Why do I need to know what time of day it is? Like, what does that ultimately mean? I have to go speak to someone at a certain time and sort of discover things that way? Are they going to lean on that or not?
I mean, I'm assuming there's scripting related to time of day. Because they said big enemy, you may encounter big enemies in the overworld, and I got a feeling like Nintendo doesn't leave anything to chance. They want that battle to be perfect, right? And so they're gonna I think they will have more of that kind of scripted encounter feeling, so they feel like meaningful, well-constructed boss battles. But we don't know yet if there is a MacGuffin in this game, right? Like whether you're the little train driver or the bird flyer or whatever, right? Like there may be an element to it. There could be a Link to the Past type element. Hopefully, they're not repeating themselves. I mean, I was disappointed a little bit when I saw the overworld at first. I mean, I love the look and the art style, but I felt like it was a little empty. Like I wanted to see someone walk by. Like I wanted to get that sense that you're seeing a living world. But at the same time, you also didn't see hookshot here, target there, and all that kind of stuff either.
It's hard to tell from the footage because it was off the screen, and I delved into a NeoGAF thread that was getting pretty intense.
Cubic square inches per between each tree.
There are a lot of little things that people found in there, and they're starting to make inferences about the world, and almost like spoilers, like, oh my god, how did you figure that out? But yeah, I think it's hard to tell from the footage.
It's always hard to tell. Like, we've been watching, you know, previews of games all our lives, and we have this whole imaginative relationships with previews, right? And then usually within 10 minutes of actually starting the game, and you're like, oh, I see what it's doing. You know, like, you know, you can put it into the familiar genres and frames, you know. Whereas when it's a preview, it still seems kind of like maybe it'll like radically change my world, because we've had a few games that when I finally played them, like Mario 64, it like radically changed my, you know,
Oh,
like,
yeah.
oh my God.
Yeah.
And that actually happens more often than you think. Like, if you think back to the kind of jump and climb games a la Tomb Raider, where when you're hanging from a ledge, you can go left or right, and then you can climb up. And if you saw an edge or a wall, that automatically meant you couldn't go any further. And like, it wasn't until, I forget if it was Prince of Persia probably, where you could then go around the corner. Everybody's like, oh, of course you can go around corners when you're hanging on a ledge, right? Like, all those little things changed over time.
You're learning to read the, you know, the visual information in the world. You learn to read it differently.
And now it would feel weird if you were restricted from making those moves, right? Like, it would be strange that you couldn't do that.
Yeah, the only other thing I bring up is the one positive thing for Skyrim that I would agree on is that because of the way it's designed, there is room for a lot of different stories, a lot of just spontaneous events where, like, I'm trying to shepherd this poor man out of a village, and all of a sudden a dragon shows up and he gets killed, and I'm just like, how many people did that happen to? You know, like, it just feels like anything can happen at any moment. I don't know. I mean, I do want Zelda to have some aspects of that, but I don't. At the same time, it became very frustrating to me because of that. Because that one guy I was trying to get out of town, every which way I tried to get him out of town, he got killed. And I ultimately came up with, well, I don't want to save you anymore. I'm done with this game.
Nintendo will never make that game. Like, they will never make that game because they're so meticulous. They're like marionettes players, right? Like, they want to give you the kind of impression that it's a living world, but they don't want you to witness something that's broken. They don't want you to see behind the cardboard facade and notice that it's all strange.
You mean dragons that fly backwards or things like that?
I mean, in Skyrim, an encounter can be incredibly impressive where you see two NPCs squaring off and a bunch of wolves running, and you're like, oh my God, right? Like, you witnessed an event. Or one of those wolves could just take off and fly into the sky. And you know, that happens all the time where, like, the AI is broken and something happens, or somebody stands in front of you and just goes and dies, and you're like, what? You know, and like, Nintendo will never go for that. I do think they will always have a little bit more control over your experience.
I wonder if they would, though, let in a little more tragedy, because I feel like some of them, you know, like, it doesn't have to be emergent necessarily, but it could still be, you know, something lost. I just feel like you know, the game flirts with that sometimes. You know, End of Wind Waker has a little bit of that melancholy, and there's, you know, Majora's Mask for sure, and there's this, I don't know, it's like the hero's quest should have a cost. Like, it shouldn't be like all success, you know. Like, if you, like, you know, the Super Brothers Sword and Sorcery game, you know, you're getting weaker as you play. It's getting harder because you're losing hearts, and that's felt somehow, you know, I'm doing something really hard, I'm getting hurt, but I'm getting, like, not just tougher, but I'm getting, like, more beat down. And I can't imagine them doing that necessarily for Link, but the idea that, you know, there's a little bit of, you know, heartache in this, or something, you know, just a little, like, human and memorable, and as opposed to just, like, total victory.
Sure.
Yeah,
it's
I think
kind of
that's
like that moment where you say goodbye to the grandmother's the shortest, like, sad moment in Wind Waker.
Yeah.
Right? You feel it, and then it's like, nope, you're back.
But
on
I think
this
we
adventure.
love Wind Waker in part because the faces are so good in that. Like, it's the style, but, like, I just you get, they are so expressive, and you just have a human kind of connection to this cartoon that, you know, is pretty rare in definitely in realistic games, because then you just, that's not a face, you know. So.
No, they did a really nice job with that.
Yeah.
I thought so
I've been
too.
thinking about what I want in the game, and I think more than anything, I want them to surprise us, and I want them to take risks and change it, and not be afraid of us getting bored too quickly, and not be afraid that we'll say, "Hey, the tunic's not green. That's bullshit. I can't play this game." You know, and I've heard fans, complain about that, like, his tunic's not green. What's happening? He has a ponytail. Where's the hat? What's going on? This isn't Zelda.
But that seems to be.
Like, it might just be a small detail, but it might be emblematic of their attitude, that they want it to. They're going to change some things fundamentally and make you a little uncomfortable, and hopefully they'll carry that through. And I can certainly come up with a list of my own things I love that I'd love to see. But more than anything, I don't want to dictate. I don't imagine how Numa's listening to this and scribbling down everything we say. But I want them to just be, like, creatively healthy and take risks.
And Nintendo, I just think they can do that sometimes. They do. Like, sometimes they don't listen to anybody, and we think, like, what's going on with them? But I respect that. You know, like, there's a downside to it when they're more conservative, or kind of like a little island that doesn't, you know, our book is about criticizing island mentalities.
Yeah.
But at the same time, sometimes you got to shut off all of the noise and all the expectations that, you know, are out there, you know, that the internet just keeps in your head all the time. And, you know, not take risks with the audience. And I don't know, Nintendo can do that sometimes.
And
they have.
That's what happened with Wind Waker, and I was at E3. I was hanging out with some Nintendo folks when the reactions for Wind Waker were coming in.
Yeah.
And
Japanese or American?
Japanese. And there was the question someone said. Miyamoto asked, "Why are people not clapping?" Right? Like there was
Oh my God.
where you could easily imagine why you
So
could,
ominous.
but why you could imagine in today's date that a company like that would be shaken by that fan
Yeah.
reaction, would say, well, maybe that's the wrong direction. Maybe we gotta add a grown-up Link to our story, and at least make him look cool and give him a big chainsaw or something, right? Like, and that risk is
Don't
out
do
there
that.
too when you instantly take in that feedback. So I'm always happy when a game comes out that is just completely bonkers and disregards what fans are asking for. At the same time, like, it's kind of tough to say that if you played the next Zelda game and that Zelda theme wouldn't kick in, just like with Final Fantasy, you want that theme to play. Like, I'd be a little sad too, if it was a complete departure from that.
Yeah.
That's a Green Tunic like effect,
But
right?
maybe if we have higher expectations for the game, I think we can have higher expectations for ourselves, right? In our own reactions. And yet at first it might feel kind of like, but you'll probably keep playing,
Yeah.
and then maybe after a few hours you'll feel differently. And I don't know. I feel like players are up for more than they say sometimes.
Yeah.
The reaction online is one thing, and the knee jerk is one thing. But I think players are more than they let on. Or they can.
Yeah.
I just think the conservatism is partly it's partly real, and it's partly in the air, and it's kind of like a contagion. But it's I don't know. I think people can do more than they say.
It all goes back to fairy tales and repetition of all
Yeah,
the
but
elements. It's
when
all
you-
Bettelheim based.
Yeah, but when you look at that reaction to then the reaction they got for Twilight Princess when they
Oh,
first
yeah.
showed
Yeah.
it, and how people erupted, like it was just, and they all looked at it and immediately said, "This is what I want."
Yep.
And then it
And what do
wasn't
we say
until
now
later
about Twilight
people,
Princess?
people now look back on Twilight Princess and a lot of them say, "Man, this was Ocarina of Time again for the most
Right.
part," and this wasn't something that different. It was a bigger scale. It was different art direction, but it wasn't that different.
Sometimes we don't know what we want.
No, of
like
course
we think
not.
we know what we want,
No.
and then we get it and we're disappointed, or we don't get it and we're surprised, or
I mean, remember the reaction to Metroid Prime being a first-person game, right?
Right.
Like, it was brutal. The feedback on our site was so negative to the concept, and nobody could imagine that you could do Super Metroid in a first-person perspective, right? And, like, I don't know how you feel about that game. I really, really loved it.
I loved
Yeah.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
same.
I haven't played it in 10 years, but it was
Yeah.
amazing back then.
And that's, I mean, that's the kind of Nintendo I want, where they basically just say, all right, we're going to do something completely different and unexpected. And, like, yeah, the reception may not always be positive, and then 10 years later, everybody says that was the best thing ever.
Oh,
That's
you
why
saying that
people-
about like Wind Waker right now? Is that what you're saying?
Wind Waker, honestly, I mean,
Sorry.
no, we really liked the game when it came out. Like, we gave it a 9.7,
Yeah.
I think, really high score. But, like, leading up to the release, like, when you were talking with friends, you're like, oh, man, video games are growing up. I wish I
Sure.
had a Zelda game that looked, was the most technologically advanced, good-looking, mature game, right?
And I was glad critics came around on it versus sort of the outright response to it. Like, I'll never forget the first line of the EGM review for Wind Waker, because it said, "What were we so worried about? What? Like, what was it? Because it's not. This is great.
Yeah.
You know. You were gonna say, David?
Oh, I like how you put it, that we could have higher expectations of ourselves or something. That I think I'd like fans to be open-minded and like look at this as an artistic work, that and that it's not always about serving up a fast food meal that's going to be the same so you feel reassured. It's like they spend 5 years on this or whatever it is, and hopefully they're challenging themselves and they're going to surprise us. I think that's why people love Nintendo, because they take these left turns and do these weird things that we wouldn't have predicted, and they've influenced the industry so many times. I mean, they're among the best for sure.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much for coming in. This is
Yeah,
a really
thank
great
you.
discussion.
Thank you.
Really, really happy to have you here. If you're interested in Second Quest, please stop what you're doing right now. Go over to www.secondquestcomic.com. You can pick up either an electronic version or order the hardcover, which we have a few. They're really cool. I'll put some photos up with the post for this episode.